He had imagined his death many times, but none of those versions included standing under a ceiling that looked like it might close its ribs and digest him if it got bored. The chamber breathed. He was almost sure of it, and each slow contraction of the organic walls made him reconsider every decision that had led him here, starting from accepting a job that had included the phrase, minimal risk. Minimal, he muttered under his breath, shifting his weight. They meant minimal chance of survival. No one responded. That was not reassuring. The beings surrounding him stood in perfect stillness, arranged in a semicircle that felt less like an audience and more like a carefully measured threat. Some were tall and crystalline, refracting the dim light into fractured rainbows. Others seemed wrapped in layers of shifting membranes that rippled as if they were thinking too loudly. None of them blinked. None of them fidgeted. One of them might have been a chair. He cleared his throat, immediately regretting it when the sound echoed far longer than it should have. Right, quiet room, very respectful, love the atmosphere, big fan of whatever this is. Still nothing. At the far end of the chamber, elevated on a structure that might have been grown rather than built, sat the queen. He had heard stories about her long before he ever saw her, stories that made grown soldiers lower their voices and seasoned diplomats reconsider their careers. None of those stories had prepared him for how composed she looked. She resembled a human woman in the broadest sense, but the details resisted familiarity. Her ears were long, elegantly curved, tapering to fine points that angled slightly backward, as if listening to something beyond the room. Her skin held a faint, almost metallic sheen, catching the low light in a way that suggested both softness and something far less fragile. Her eyes were the worst of it, calm, impossibly deep, and utterly uninterested in excuses. He swallowed. "Hello," he said, because apparently his brain had decided that politeness was the best defense against certain death. A faint ripple passed through the gathered court. It might have been shock. It might have been second-hand embarrassment. "Good start," he whispered to himself. "Introduce yourself to the most dangerous being in the galaxy like you're meeting a neighbor." The queen did not respond immediately. She simply watched him, and that silence pressed against him harder than any weapon could have. He resisted the urge to wave awkwardly. Time stretched. He began to wonder if this was part of the execution, prolonged anticipation until he simply collapsed from his own imagination. "Okay," he said quietly, mostly to himself. "Maybe don't talk." He nodded once, as if agreeing with his own advice, and promptly ignored it. "In my defense, I didn't know I'd be brought here. If I had known, I would have done something differently. Worn better shoes, prepared a speech, practiced not sweating." One of the membrane-wrapped figures made a faint, fluttering sound. He wasn't sure if that was laughter or a biological warning signal. The queen rose. The movement was smooth, unhurried, and somehow louder than anything else that had happened so far. The entire chamber seemed to tighten in response. Several of the alien courtiers shifted, just slightly, but enough to break their perfect stillness. He froze. "Ah," he said under his breath. "Here we go, dramatic walk toward inevitable doom. Classic." She stepped down from the elevated structure, each footfall deliberate. The distance between them began to close, and with it, his remaining optimism quietly packed its bags and left. He considered kneeling, then realized he had no idea what the correct protocol was. "Bo, wave again, pretend to faint." "Too late now," he murmured. "Commit to standing." She approached until she stood directly in front of him. Up close the differences were even more striking. There was a precision to her features, a kind of controlled perfection that felt less natural and more designed. He realized he was staring. "Sorry," he said quickly. "It's just, you don't look like you're about to kill me, which is confusing because everyone else definitely does." Silence. He nodded again. "I'll stop talking." He did not stop talking after this. Her gaze remained fixed on him, unreadable. Then, without warning, she lifted her hand. He tensed, bracing for something: energy discharge, disintegration, sudden and unpleasant transformation into a cautionary tale. Instead, her fingers closed gently around his hand. The contact was warm. That was the first thought that broke through the shock. Not painful, not overwhelming, just warm, steady, and entirely real. He blinked. "That's new," he said. Nothing happened. He looked down at their joined hands, turning his wrist slightly as if expecting to see some visible effect. Glowing veins, spontaneous vaporization, at the very least a mild spark. "Give it a second," he muttered. "Maybe it's a delayed reaction, like those desserts that explode after you eat them." Still nothing. The silence behind him shattered, not with noise but with movement. Several of the alien figures shifted sharply, their composure cracking. One of the crystalline beings emitted a sharp, chiming sound like glass struck too hard. He glanced over his shoulder. "Is that bad?" he asked. "That sounds bad." No one answered him. He looked back at the Queen. "Just so we're clear, if this is the part where I suddenly turn into energy or something, I'd appreciate a bit of warning. I've always wanted a dramatic exit, but I'd like to at least prepare a line." Her expression did not change. Her hand remained around his. And for the first time since he had entered the chamber, he realized something was wrong, not with him but with everything else. Because nothing was happening. And apparently, that was the most dangerous thing of all. He was still alive, which felt increasingly suspicious the longer it continued. They had not killed him, imprisoned him, vaporized him, or even mildly inconvenienced him with a threatening speech. Instead, they had escorted him, very politely, which somehow made it worse, through corridors that curved in ways geometry would strongly object to, and placed him inside a chamber that refused to decide whether it was a room or a living organism. "Right," he said, turning slowly in place. "So this is not a cell." No one answered. The guards, if they were guards, stood at the entrance without moving, their forms elongated and smooth, as if sculpted out of shadow and then told to behave. He pointed at them. "You two are definitely guards, though. I'm getting a strong don't try anything vibe." "Silence fair," he muttered. "I wouldn't answer me either." He walked toward what looked like a surface designed for sitting. It adjusted slightly as he approached, reshaping itself into something more comfortable. He froze mid-step. "Okay, that's unsettling," he said, "but also kind of impressive." He sat cautiously. The surface shifted again, perfectly supporting him. "Of course it does," he sighed. "Alien throne room, terrifying, alien furniture, 5-star experience." A faint hum passed through the walls, low and rhythmic, like distant machinery or a heartbeat trying not to be noticed. He leaned back, staring upward. "So," he said to the ceiling, "I'm not dead. That's unexpected. I had a whole emotional arc prepared for that." The ceiling did not respond, which he took as agreement. Time passed, or something like it. It was difficult to measure here, where light did not change and nothing cast a proper shadow. Eventually, the wall opposite him rippled. He sat up immediately. "Ah," he said, "here comes the explanation, or the execution." Could still go either way. The Queen entered. He straightened instinctively, then hesitated, unsure whether to stand, bow, or pretend he had always been perfectly still and dignified. "Too late," he whispered to himself, already halfway to standing. He stood. "Hello again," he said, because apparently he had learned nothing. She stopped a short distance from him, her gaze steady, her posture unchanged from before, precise, controlled, like every movement had already been decided long ago. He gestured vaguely. "Nice room," he added. "Very alive, literally, I think." No reaction. "Right," he said, still not a talker. She moved closer. He resisted the urge to step back, mostly because his legs had decided to stop negotiating with him. "You touched me," he said, then immediately winced. "That sounded accusatory. I didn't mean it like that. Statistically speaking, that was unusual." Silence stretched again, but this time it felt different, not empty but deliberate. "You're not supposed to do that, right?" He continued. "Based on the collective panic back there, I'm guessing that was a big deal." Her eyes remained on him, unblinking. He nodded slowly. "Okay, confirmed, big deal." He took a breath. So here's where I ask the obvious question. Why am I still alive? The hum in the room deepened slightly, as if reacting to the question. You can answer in any format, he added quickly. Words would be great, gestures fine. Ominous silence, already familiar with that one. She tilted her head just slightly, but enough to break the perfect symmetry of her stillness. It was the first movement that felt curious. He noticed immediately. Oh, he said, that's new. That's a thinking tilt, right? We have that too, usually followed by a bad idea. Her gaze shifted, not away but through him, as if measuring something he couldn't see. He swallowed. If you're scanning me, I should warn you, there's not much to find. Mostly poor decisions and a questionable sense of humor. The faintest flicker crossed her expression, not quite emotion but not entirely absence either. He blinked. Was that no, I'm imagining things. Stress does that. She stepped closer. He stayed where he was, though every instinct suggested retreat. Okay, he said quietly. If this is another touch situation, I'd just like to point out that the first one already caused a galaxy-wide existential crisis. Maybe we pace ourselves. Her hand lifted again, he sighed. Of course it does. Her fingers hovered near his, not touching this time, but close enough that he could feel the warmth again, like a memory his body hadn't let go of. You're checking something, he said, more to himself than to her. Not random, not symbolic, you're confirming. The hum shifted, higher now, sharper. He frowned. That's either agreement or a warning. I'm going to assume agreement for my own peace of mind. Her hand lowered. He exhaled slowly, realizing he had been holding his breath. Good, he said, because I'm running out of calm reactions. She turned slightly, as if the conversation, if it could be called that, had reached a point only she understood. Wait, he said quickly. That's it. You're just going to leave me with more questions. That feels strategically unfair. She paused. For a moment he thought she might actually respond. Instead, she continued toward the wall. Of course, he muttered. Maintain the mystery. Very effective. Extremely frustrating. The wall opened for her, then sealed behind her without a sound. He stood there, staring at the place where she had been. Well, he said after a long moment, that clarified absolutely nothing. He sat back down heavily. Let's review, he continued, counting on his fingers. I was captured, brought to the most dangerous being in the galaxy, not killed, touched, twice, almost, caused what I assume is a cultural meltdown, and now I'm in a very comfortable not prison with no explanation. He paused. I think I might be important, he said. The idea settled in, unwelcome and heavy. Yeah, he added, leaning back again. That's definitely worse than dying. The third time she came for him, the walls didn't ripple first. He noticed that immediately, which was unsettling, because it meant he was getting used to things that should never feel normal. You're early, he said, looking up from where he had been attempting to map the room with a piece of broken, self-regenerating furniture that refused to stay broken. Or I've lost track of time. Honestly, both feel likely. She stood there as composed as ever, long ears angled slightly back, as if listening to something beyond him again. I've been thinking, he added, dropping the useless fragment. Dangerous, I know, but I don't think you're here to decide whether I live or die anymore. Silence. He stood slowly, brushing off nothing in particular. I think you already decided that, back there. He stepped closer before he could talk himself out of it. So now the question is why? Her gaze held his, steady, unyielding, but no longer entirely distant. There was something else now, something that had not been there when he first stood in that vast chamber expecting to become a historical footnote. You checked something when you touched me, he said. Not physically, not just that, something deeper. The hum in the room shifted again, but this time he didn't flinch. I'm not special, he continued. I know that. I'm not a soldier, not a diplomat, not secretly a genius hiding from responsibility. I'm just the guy who took a bad contract and ended up in the wrong part of the galaxy. He paused, then smiled faintly. Consistently, actually, I have a talent for that. She moved then, closing the distance between them in a way that felt less like a threat and more like a decision already made. "Unless," he said quietly, "it's not about what I am." Her hand lifted again. He didn't step back this time. "Right," he said, "we're doing this again." Her fingers touched his. The world didn't explode, it didn't even shake, but something unfolded, not around him, through him. A sensation like a memory that wasn't his, like standing in a place he had never been and somehow recognizing it. Vast structures, older than any empire he had heard of, networks that stretched across space not as distance but as connection. A system built long before fear became law. He inhaled sharply. "Okay, okay, that's new," he said, voice strained but not panicked. "Definitely new." The images, if they were images, shifted. He felt patterns, not thoughts exactly, but intentions. A design that required something simple and impossibly rare. Contact, unfiltered, unfeared, unbroken. He blinked and the room snapped back into place. He was still standing there, her hand still on his heart racing in a way that felt entirely inadequate for what had just happened. "You're not breaking a rule," he said slowly. "You're testing one." Her gaze sharpened, not in surprise but in confirmation. He let out a short, breathless laugh. "Of course you are. Of course the most feared being in the galaxy is the only one willing to check if the thing everyone believes is actually true." He looked down at their hands, then back at her. "And it's not, is it? The whole touch equals destruction thing. That's not a law, that's a failure, something that went wrong a long time ago." The hum in the walls shifted, rising almost resonant. "You've been ruling through fear because it works," he continued. "But you knew something didn't add up, so you tried the one thing no one else would risk." He exhaled slowly. "And instead of dying, I connected to whatever that was." She released his hand. For a moment he almost missed it. "That network," he said, searching for words that felt too small. "It's still there, buried under all the rules and the fear and the assumptions. And you needed someone who wasn't part of any of it. No expectations. No built-in panic response." He pointed at himself. "Congratulations. You found the least qualified candidate in the galaxy." A faint pause. "I mean that in a good way," he added. The wall behind her opened, but this time it revealed more than a corridor. Voices, movement, the court. He stared at the opening. "You're not hiding this." She turned slightly, waiting. He hesitated. "You want me to walk out there?" Silence. He looked toward the doorway again, then back at her. "Last time I was in that room, I was pretty sure I was about to die. Now I'm apparently part of a galaxy-wide paradigm shift." He rubbed his face. "I really should have negotiated better pay." She didn't move, he sighed. "Right growth moment." He straightened, glancing once more at the living walls, the impossible geometry, the place that had terrified him not long ago. "I thought surviving was the goal," he said quietly. "Turns out that was just the introduction." He looked at her. "You're not doing this alone, are you?" Her gaze held his steady. He nodded. "Yeah, I figured." He walked toward the opening, then stopped just before stepping through. "One condition," he said, turning back. "If this goes badly, and I feel like that's statistically likely, you admit I tried my best." "A beat. And maybe don't let them turn me into a monument," he added. "I'd hate to be remembered as that guy who accidentally fixed everything. It sets unrealistic expectations." No response. He smiled anyway. "Worth a shot." Then he stepped into the chamber. The reaction was immediate, not loud, not chaotic, but intense. Every figure shifted, attention locking onto him with a weight that felt almost physical. He swallowed. "Hello again," he said. "Miss me?" No one answered. "Still a tough crowd," he muttered. The Queen stepped forward beside him. That changed everything. The tension didn't disappear, it transformed. What had been fear became something sharper, uncertain, unstable. Good, he thought. Uncertainty meant things could change. He took a breath, then did the one thing he had apparently become